This student with long hair, despite having a young girl beside him, harbors a specific preference for 40-year-old female instructors. But considering her looks, who could blame him? Although his match is starting soon, he pays zero attention to his rival. He simply invites the instructor for a meal. And spoiler alert, that meal definitely took place. The requirement for her to agree to the meal is that he emerges victorious in the match. He proceeds to not only thrash his rival mercilessly, but also severs his vocal cords and shatters multiple bones. Why exactly is this kid attracted to mature women and so brutal toward his peers? Originally, he was considered a complete loser, ridiculed on countless occasions. Even Frey Blake's own father rejected him for his weakness, demanding he vanish from his sight. Incapable of enduring such immense stress, he opted to return to his dorm. At that precise moment, Lucas Trauman possessed his physical vessel. Lucas stood as the absolute strongest archmage of his time, a ninth circle Grant sorcerer who could wipe out an entire legion using a single incantation. To put that in perspective, a mere 10 magic users ever achieved the 8th circle throughout history. This man had reached the 9th circle. Eventually, a demigod showed up, calling him overly proud. He had defied the divine entity simply by achieving the pinnacle of mortal potential, so he was imprisoned by a mighty curse. He remained confined there for 4 millennia. He was on the verge of madness. When Frey suddenly manifested in his mind, the young man was filled with regret and solely desired power. That was when Lucas claimed his physical form. He pledged to grant every wish Frey harbored and additionally vowed to enact vengeance upon the demigod. He devoted the whole night to intense practice. By the conclusion of his initial training day, he had successfully attained the 5th tier. Naturally, he needed to purge numerous toxins from his system to achieve this. For context, the Academy's headmaster is at the 6th circle. Currently in the campus quad, the local thugs are meeting up. Their boss mentions how excited he is to pummel Frey once more. They chuckle about how viciously they battered him previously. The heavier kid noticed that he spotted Frey exiting the medical wing yesterday carrying multiple sedatives. Consequently, they wager on whether he chose to terminate his own existence, with the boss assuming he lacked the courage for it. Concurrently, Lucas had successfully cleansed all the toxins from Frey's system. The kid clearly endured tremendous hardship, though evidently not to the extent Lucas had. Ought he to seek out a blood transfusion? Back at the Westro Academy dining hall, the crowd is astonished. Frey is inhaling massive amounts of grub like it is completely normal. The onlookers guess he's starved for a week, though the reality is he hasn't felt a warm meal in his belly for 4 millennia. So the 4,000-year-old Lucas now must navigate an academy packed with immature kids. He must grasp the current state of the world before he can execute his vengeance against the demigod. Moving on to the lecture hall, the troublemakers have already gathered. The entire room glares at him, especially their boss, who simultaneously declares he won their wager since Frey is still breathing. Without warning, the boss shoves his leg into Frey's walkway, sarcastically welcoming his peer. Clearly, there is no mutual respect here, and the mockery is primed to start. Abruptly, the heavy-set student seizes Frey, demanding 10 lunch vouchers lost during their gamble. Frey merely wonders who this fool is to tap his skull so disrespectfully. Plainly, this individual was no ally to the body's former occupant. Uncontrollably, his physical form begins to shiver. What could cause such violent shaking? Right as the larger student's strike nears its target, Frey vanishes and materializes behind him, moving with teleportation-like swiftness. The entire room is stunned by his incredible velocity. Nobody comprehends the movement, and Lucas soon deducts that his new vessel is shuddering because these specific tormentors pushed the original Frey towards suicide. His fury ignited. The large student scrambled up and swiped at Frey's face to strike him, yet Frey unleashed a pulse of mana. Keeping his hands casually pocketed, he launched the aggressor backward. The boy shattered multiple temper seats upon impact. The tormentor was left flushed, battered, drained, and completely bewildered. Frey had defeated him without uttering a single incantation. Murmurs circulated rapidly. Students muttered that Frey appeared entirely transformed. Acknowledging he had caused a spectacle before a group of children, Frey felt mildly awkward. The entire room was paralyzed in shock. He attempted to seamlessly blend back into the background. David was paralyzed by fear, unable to vocalize a word. He merely stared. Nobody could fathom that the pathetic Frey was capable of this. A crimson-haired female student continued observing him intensely. Then someone questioned the commotion. Professor Dio had just entered the room. Jack was completely unconscious. Professor Dio approached to examine the fallen boy and detected residual mana lingering within him. This realization astounded the teacher. He found it hard to swallow that someone so talented resided in his roster. Scanning the room, he pondered which pupil was responsible. Because Dio hauled Jack to safety after verifying he was merely knocked out, Professor Kevin assumed control of the lecture. The pupils traded nervous glances right as the session commenced. Professor Kevin swiftly observed the high number of female students present. Noting their majority, he instantly concluded this was his favorite group. His gaze then fixed upon Isabel, who was silently studying. Shortly after, another figure caught his attention. Frey was present as well, similarly engrossed in literature. A female student muttered that she despised this instructor due to his creepy, swine-like demeanor around women. The teacher approached Frey, who eyed him cautiously. Finding the youth in the lecture hall was unusual given his chronic truancy. Frey hesitated on how to respond. Initially, Kevin mistook him for a diligent learner, before recalling his persistent absences. Smirking, Frey offered an apology, claiming his schedule had been packed. The female students murmured about how pitiful that excuse sounded, noting he only arrived to get harassed anyway. Intrigued, the instructor questioned what activities could possibly trump his lectures. Frey deflected the inquiry, stating he was simply enjoying the prime of his adolescence. The young women stifled their giggles. Kevin found the response absurd, yet he wasn't one to pretend his curriculum was the center of the universe. Instead, he inquired if Frey had maintained his studies. He chose to evaluate the boy. Should Frey fail to respond correctly, he would be punished for his arrogance. The examination began. The initial query: list the trio of artifacts utilized by the spell-wielding combatant, King Kassadin. Frey squinted his eyes. Rather than giving an answer, he requested the instructor to state the name once more. He hadn't heard it distinctly, yet it rang a prominent bell. 4 millennia past, a champion existed. Powerful, brave, possessing enigmatic abilities that awed the masses. He practiced physical combat with unparalleled dedication. His aura alone could decimate entire woodlands, triggering tremors and ruin in his wake. He was capable of altering the very terrain, all while exhibiting boundless stamina. On a particular afternoon, his companion teased that his relentless routines would eventually level every mountain. That companion, hefting a sack over his shoulder, was none other than Lucas Trauman. A fair amount of time had passed since his previous encounter with Kassadin. The weather was peaceful, and Lucas observed his ally continuing his drills. Kassadin refused to halt his regimen, despite having company. He merely mentioned a brewed pot of tea, inviting Lucas to serve himself. During their beverage break, Lucas inquired if his friend ever considered wedlock. Kassadin hesitated briefly. He subsequently mocked Lucas, claiming the mage could never fathom female emotions. Adoring a lady, he claimed, possessed the power to shatter a man's foundation. A feeble-minded individual would inevitably succumb to such a lure. Kassadin maintained that a combatant must remain as rigid as a boulder in the presence of females. Magicians held a rather different perspective. Lucas scrutinized his companion, while Kassadin silently returned the gaze. Eventually, Lucas playfully stated he would romance a stone, provided it was attractive. This vivid recollection struck Frey with such force that tears formed in his eyes. He grasped that his former comrade, the spell-wielding monarch Kassadin, had evolved into a historical legend over the centuries. Instructor Kevin was completely baffled by the youth's emotional display. The remaining students bickered regarding the difficulty of the trivia. Isabel recognized the teacher posed the query solely to flaunt his intellect and humiliate Frey. Suddenly, a polite voice requested to interject. Isabel declared the trivia held zero relevance to arcane history. The room was paralyzed by her audacity. Frey himself observed her militaristic tone, which heavily contrasted her fragile appearance. The instructor instantly locked his attention onto her. His face grew stern. She debated that Kassadin was a martial artist who utilized mana merely to bolster his physical routines, thus disqualifying him as a sorcerer. She then anticipated his rebuttal with anxiety. Kevin ascended the stairs in her direction and halted directly next to her station. He interrogated whether pupil Isabel was degrading all practitioners of the spell combatant's discipline. Rattled, she clarified that was not her intention. The entire room observed mutely. Frey perceived it as offensive as well, recalling that Kassadin despised the sorcerer label. The instructor released a forced chuckle, noting this could evolve into a fascinating debate. He placed a palm upon her shoulder, instructing both pupils to visit his personal quarters. However, Isabel promptly swatted his grip aside. This reaction entirely blindsided him. He never anticipated such blatant insubordination from a learner. Isabel found herself cornered. Just as he pressured her to respond on Frey's behalf, another voice cut through. The phrases Gauntlet of the Tiger Monarch and Colossus Strap caused the instructor to stiffen. He turned sluggishly toward the source. Frey was composedly stating that Kassadin strictly wielded those specific artifacts. He nearly launched into an anecdote about their past camaraderie, before pausing to ask if his words were peculiar. The teacher confessed, jaw clenched, that the response was accurate. Frey boasted confidently that such a query was impossible for him to fail. To the onlookers, his behavior was exceptionally bizarre that afternoon. Kevin shifted his focus back to Isabel, declaring her conduct highly insolent. He seized her arm, demanding she accompany him to his private room. She remained immobilized, unsure of her next move. Frey monitored the situation, subsequently intervening by reciting an old Kassadin quote. He reiterated that adoring a lady had the power to shatter a man's foundation. Kassadin had added, a combatant must remain as rigid as a boulder in the presence of females, otherwise a feeble-minded individual will succumb to allure and devolve into a mere beast. The teacher despised interruptions and missed the underlying message, snapping back that perhaps Kassadin was incorrect. Frey lowered his gaze, observing that the instructor remained firmly planted on his legs. Suddenly, Kevin grasped the hidden mockery, and fury washed over his features. He bellowed Frey's title, seething at the sheer audacity. It was in that moment Isabel comprehended Frey was protecting her. At present, Instructor Kevin aimed his total wrath at the pupil who gained arrogance following a single correct reply. He cautioned that Frey would suffer deeply if he botched the remainder of the examination. Frey serenely anticipated the subsequent prompt. Concurrently, the teacher was perspiring profusely. The crowd merely gawked in disbelief. Frey tackled every single query effortlessly, particularly regarding the era of brilliance. His expertise was staggering. As the chime echoed, Frey felt purely relieved that the midday meal had arrived. He addressed Instructor Kevin, expressing his amusement, and inquired if further trivia remained, noting his extreme hunger. Kevin remained baffled as to how this delinquent possessed such profound insight into history from 4 millennia past. Frey's expression remained completely neutral. The teacher's irritation merely magnified, beads of moisture trailing down his brow. Ultimately, he released the students and continuously pondered the bizarre occurrences. Isabel remained equally bewildered. Beyond the school walls, Frey strolled joyfully, lightly vocalizing a tune. Isabel then questioned if he was heading to eat. She had approached from his rear, yet he offered no reply. She continued to view him with a sympathetic gaze. Frey pivoted and disregarded her presence, though she persisted in trailing him, resulting in them traveling in a single-file line. Frey quickly caught on. He rotated and questioned her reasons for tailing him. He additionally found her overly polite diction irritating, despite it stemming from her noble upbringing. Shortly thereafter, the pair entered the dining area. The midday feast was underway. Isabel was appalled by Frey's sheer caloric intake. He nonchalantly mentioned he had been fasting for 4 millennia. Nevertheless, he elaborated no further. Isabel expressed regret for stalking him, stating she simply desired no other seating arrangement. Subsequently, she probed into his vast comprehension of the era of brilliance. Historical texts dictated the period earned its title due to the spectacular abilities of the quartet of supreme grandmasters. Mid-bite, Frey's curiosity piqued. He deduced that over the span of 4,000 years, arcane arts had failed to progress entirely. In fact, they had regressed. He speculated whether the demigod was responsible for this decline. Opposite him, the youth consumed her meal quietly while he detailed the quartet of supreme grandmasters: Kassadin the combat mage, Schweizer Wilsman the scholar, Iris Peacefounder the shadow sorceress, and Lucas Trauman. Her face brightened upon hearing Lucas labeling him a phenomenal individual. She playfully noted that if he survived to this day, she would request her mother's blessing to wed him. Frey erupted into chuckles at the remark. He was baffled that a person so juvenile was discussing matrimony. Entertained and mildly complimented, he courteously declined the proposal. In the background, surrounding pupils monitored their exchange. Gossip had already circulated regarding Isabel tailing him previously. She held the reputation of the institution's runner-up scholar, and even the unhinged David harbored affections for her. At that precise second, David materialized upon catching his title. The bystanders hastily retreated from his path, whereas Frey and Isabel continued their dialogue. David was utterly floored by the visual. Slicing through a piece of meat, Isabel inquired regarding instructor Kevin's final trivia. Frey continued chewing, detailing that Schweizer's regimen consisted of absorption, progression, and clash. She admitted to solely studying the initial duo. Resting a palm upon the dining surface, she requested he educate her on clash. Chopping into a roll, Frey questions her current magical tier. Isabel had attained the third circle of the arcane. He found it commendable that a youth her age had progressed so thoroughly. She highlighted his tendency to speak like an elder. Scraping his dish spotless, he stated he had existed for a lengthy duration. From her perspective, however, they shared the exact same youth. In a sense, her assumption was simultaneously accurate and flawed. Upon concluding his massive feast, Frey declared his appetite satiated. He stood up grasping his trays, purposefully avoiding a direct answer regarding her tuition on Clash. He informed her his knowledge lacked structural form, stemming purely from practical usage, advising her to consult literature instead. Essentially, he was unable to instruct her adequately. Discovering his hands-on background astounded her further. She remained baffled as to how a peer possessed such deep arcane wisdom. While he departed with the empty tableware, she continually pondered his true identity. Afterwards, the pupils attended combat sorcery practice. To ensure balance, participants were restricted to primary tier incantations. David was ecstatic regarding the rules, though highly aggravated observing Frey bond with Isabel. He failed to grasp why she conversed with the outcast. The instructor cautioned the group that matches would mirror authentic combat, urging utmost gravity. Freya observed the instructor with intense focus. Her title was Jane. He was completely captivated by her allure. Isabel objected, claiming such behavior toward a 40-year-old educator was inappropriate, yet he persisted in complimenting her flawless feminine physique. Isabel was appalled that even his romantic preferences felt antiquated. The inaugural spar pitted David against Frey. The pair squared up, prepared for combat. Frey advanced casually, sporting a smirk. David expresses extreme anticipation, extending a palm. Frey disregarded the gesture, pivoting his body. An aura around him appeared altered. He no longer resembled the timid victim David habitually tormented. The crowd inhaled sharply as Frey embraced instructor Jane around the midsection, complimenting her appearance. As she stiffened in sheer surprise, he reassured her to remain calm. He claimed his exterior was youthful, yet his soul outaged hers. Subsequently, he invited her for an evening meal. Jane wrestled to liberate herself, commanding him to retreat to his position. Frey proposed a wager. Should he emerge the victor, she must grant him the date. The audience deemed it impossible, given his basic tier status, contrasting David's third-tier capabilities. Confident in his imminent defeat, Jane agreed to the terms. Thus, an agreement was struck. His dialogue left her flustered. A rosy hue painted her cheeks as she hastily sought composure. Her pulse possessed no business accelerating over a pupil. Standing face to face once more, David questioned if Frey had lost his sanity. He continuously attempted to provoke his rival, assuming the stunt was a ploy to force a cancellation of the spar. Fury and malice shone vividly in David's gaze. He incessantly ridiculed Frey, who remained entirely stoic. David threatened to extract his voice box, followed by shattering his entire skeletal structure. He swore this marked Frey's final afternoon on 2 working legs, yet Frey exhibited zero terror. From his recollection, basic tier magic lacked such destructive potential. Regardless, David postured as an omnipotent force. Upon instructor Jane's command, the skirmish commenced. Both youths maintained their footing. David initiated with Rocky Wrath. Massive boulders levitated from the earth, constructing a gigantic earthen projectile overhead. The audience was appalled he could manifest Rocky Wrath. Isabel remained equally paralyzed. Jane specified a restriction to primary incantations, yet David had technically bypassed violating the mandate. The crimson-haired student questioned the legality of such a technique. David clarified it served as an exclusive bloodline ability, subsequently triggering ocular sorcery. Despite its potency, a basic tier magic user could operate it. His lineage revered ocular sorcery as an emblem of authority, yet he utilized it merely for intimidation. Directing the earthen projectiles toward Frey, he assumed his rival was petrified. Frey dismissed the display, labeling the magic as trivial. He then unleashed an arcane projectile single-handedly. The spectators quieted in disbelief, Isabel included. The hue of the incantation radiated intensely. David chuckled. Obviously, an arcane projectile stood no chance against Rocky Wrath. He launched the earthen missile toward Frey, and in one solitary collision, Frey obliterated the rocks entirely and launched David backward with horrifying velocity. The impact tossed him skyward. He slammed into the dirt and tumbled, severely wounded, while foam gathered at his lips. The pupils were rendered mute. Even instructor Jane was captivated by Frey's might. He appeared to have evolved tremendously. Concurrently, David wailed in agony. He remained incapable of speech due to severe throat trauma. The visual was gruesome. Adjacent to them, a pupil remains gripping a pebble tightly. They had merely gathered to witness a standard C-rank training bout. Frey declared David brought disgrace to his lineage by executing ocular sorcery so brazenly during a spar. David attempted to vocalize, yet solely saliva escaped his lips. Recalling David's promise to rip his voice box out, Frey offered a subtle smirk. The luminescent orb materialized once more to fulfill its purpose. David had sworn to pulverize the skeleton piece by piece, and Frey prepared to reciprocate the gesture. Acknowledging his defeat, David wished to plead for clemency, yet zero dialogue surfaced due to his injuries. With a gentle flick, Frey launched the javelin once more. It impacted David's limb, prompting an agonized shriek as he recognized his grim fate. The skeletal structure of his right limb was utterly obliterated. Despite this, Frey continued his approach, stating this mirrored David's original scheme. Isabel clamped hands over her lips. Witnessing the brutality escalate, instructor Jane pivoted and commanded an immediate halt to the bout, crowning Frey the victor, although David never yielded. Frey pointed out her previous instruction to treat the spar as an authentic war, noting that combat zones lack pauses. Isabel failed to grasp the educator's reasoning. Helpless, she dropped her gaze. Frey's irises shifted hues, manifesting his pure wrath. David had taken pleasure in harming peers, yet currently the tables were turned. Frey proclaimed sorcerers of his ilk were the reason the realm had evolved into chaos. For the greater good, he must be stripped of his arcane privileges permanently. Pace by pace, Frey advanced. Suddenly, he claimed he was jesting. He opted against shattering every bone. Out of mercy, he would conclude the punishment. David wept even louder. He felt a fleeting relief until Frey rotated back, stating, "The lesson hasn't concluded. David possesses a second leg, so an arcane projectile must strike that one as well." Observing the orb regenerate, David's gaze brimmed with hopelessness. The energy pooling in Frey's palm intensified. David attempted to wail, yet zero audio emerged. From a distance, bystanders silently observed Frey's dominance. A fair-haired pupil scrutinized the scene closely prior to pivoting and departing. In another location, an additional duo analyzed the battling grounds. The tale circulated the campus rapidly. Rumors claimed Frey obliterated David during a spar, crippling his throat and lower limbs. The majority privately considered David a fool and believed the institution benefited from his absence. Nevertheless, they found it difficult to swallow that the Blake lineage's outcast had triumphed. A portion even theorized he had forged a demonic pact. While Frey navigated the corridors, a male halted his path. Frey failed to recognize him, prompting an inquiry for a name. The youth identified himself as Yaimon Milo, a senior pupil. Upon discovering his senior status, Frey provided his own introduction. They exchanged piercing glares. Following this, Yaimon straightforwardly proposed a position within the Traman rings. Catching that title awakened an emotion within Frey. At this point, he possessed knowledge regarding the faction. It operated as a pupil coalition representing Westro Academy, maintaining strict entry requirements. Their member selection was rigorous. The runic band upon Yaimon's finger verified his allegiance to the Traman rings. Frey, on the other hand, primarily pondered whether utilizing his historical title without consent qualified as a privacy breach. He remained silent as the senior continued pitching. Prior to Yaimon revealing his status as the faction's boss, Frey pivoted away. He harbored zero desire to participate. A vocal tone then remarked, "That youth won't be easily swayed." It belonged to Perun Jun, lingering in the corridor. Yaimon saluted his formidable associate. Catching the title, Frey tuned in. The fresh arrival advanced and identified himself as the faction's true boss. He offered apologies for Yaimon's conduct, adding that his companion nonetheless spoke honestly regarding the Traman rings. Frey merely glared back mutely. He began truly analyzing the youth standing before him. Considering his youth, he possessed the aura of a formidable commander. Regardless, Frey retained zero interest in enlisting. He departed, mentioning he would waive any fees for exploiting his moniker. Yaemin became enraged by his sheer arrogance, yet Perun instructed him to drop the issue. Rubbing his scalp, the associate expressed regret for the flare-up. Concurrently, the azure-eyed youth observed his departure. That evening, attendees commenced showing up. The meal was fully arranged. The instructor had committed to dining alongside Frey. However, Isabel's presence created an awkward atmosphere. During the meal, Isabel nonchalantly suggested they disregard her and act as if she were invisible. Irritated, Frey instructed her to exit. She simply lifted her shoulders and mentioned the clash technique, prompting the instructor to eavesdrop intently. Because Frey withheld the lesson thus far, Isabel determined her optimal strategy was maintaining proximity. Intrigued, instructor Jane inquired if she referred to Schweizer's regimen. Isabel felt shocked that the educator possessed knowledge of it as well. Jane consumed the gulp of her beverage, stating she solely caught whispers from combatants. She had scoured historical texts repeatedly, yet discovered zero evidence. Upon grasping that Frey held the answers, she craved further details. Frey silently sipped his drink. Abruptly, a figure approached their seating, and an unexpected physical contact shocked the teacher. Frey positioned himself at her rear, embraced her, and claimed he possessed something significantly more fascinating to teach. He proposed shifting their dialogue to his private quarters. The educator found herself magnetized by him, although she wavered due to his 20 years of age. It felt as though her intellect and physical form operated independently. Seconds prior to locking lips, Isabel struck the dining surface, commanding Frey to cease his inappropriate conduct with the teacher. The lunar sphere hovered prominently above. Near the terrace, Frey pondered his fresh existence. Should the demigod genuinely govern the planet, he represented a critical danger. Despite 4 millennia passing, humanity retained memories of Cassidon, Schweizer, Iris, and himself. This indicated his heritage survived, and individuals continued championing it. Isabel approached soundlessly. He remained so deeply submerged in contemplation that he failed to detect her. She merely observed him with broadened pupils. A second later, Frey locked eyes with her and posed an inquiry. He sought the identity of the institution's overseer. Specifically, he demanded the most powerful individual across the pupil body, faculty, and administration. Prior to responding, she whined about his constant refusal to entertain her own queries. He vowed compliance provided she revealed the hierarchy's apex. Thrilled, she rejoiced via tiny gestures of her palms. She revealed the most formidable pupil was Perun Jun, whereas instructor Dio Polsman and instructor Adelia topped the faculty roster. However, the absolute pinnacle of power likely belonged to her relative. Her aunt served as the chief administrator of Westro Academy, Madame Cyrus Tristan. Instructor Jane subsequently grouped with them. She detailed that Cyrus was a renowned 6th-tier sorceress possessing an icy demeanor. Frey comprehended the sheer weight of such a classification. Theoretically, magic users possessed the potential for the 9th tier, yet 0 individuals achieved it for 3 millennia. A fraction even questioned its feasibility, claiming the actual ceiling sat at the 8th tier. Less than 10 sorcerers ever conquered that milestone, rendering the 9th tier an utter myth. Frey scanned the perimeter, inquiring if the chief administrator additionally established the wards shielding the campus. Instructor Jane remained uncertain, yet deemed it plausible. Frey processed that battling a 6th-tier sorceress was currently beyond his capabilities. Subsequently, he recalled the proposal from the Traman rings. Sensing an underlying anomaly, he concluded an encounter with Cyrus Tristan was necessary. He shifted toward his fresh companion, gesturing for her approach. His features relaxed as he contemplated the upcoming request, knowing tangling a naive youth in his affairs carried risks. His objective involved securing a minimum of the 7th tier. The educator warned him such progression required a decade, assuming peak efficiency. Frey countered he would achieve it prior to the term break's conclusion. Jane chuckled, praising grand ambitions, yet his statement was entirely literal. Observing the educator standing solo, he approached, resuming his romantic advances. Isabel, deeply irritated, highlighted her continued presence. She cautioned that should a faculty member be discovered fraternizing with a pupil, her relative would intervene harshly. This immediately shattered his seduction attempt. Such scenarios embodied his exact disdain for juveniles. Consequently, Instructor Jane nodded and departed, an act that further infuriated Isabel. The lanterns illuminated the darkness. Frey acknowledged haste was unnecessary. Avoiding blunders remained his sole priority. Gazing toward the lunar sphere, he selected the most rapid trajectory. A fortnight passed before a limping figure appeared. David returned to the campus, hunting for Frey. He persistently denied his defeat, claiming it was impossible for garbage like Frey to emerge victorious. The entire corridor echoed with the screams. Simultaneously, Frey peacefully perused a novel. Flushed with sheer fury, David vowed to make him curse his own birth. He threatened to transform Frey's existence into an absolute nightmare. Prior to completing his sentence, Frey launched an arcane projectile, dropping him instantly. David's mobility aids clattered away as he collapsed. Surrounding pupils observed with terror. Currently, his nasal bridge was shattered alongside his limbs. Following this, instructor Kevin announced during a lecture that David returned to his estate for medical attention. Apathetic, Frey roamed the corridors. He pondered that attendees of the elite Westro Academy ought to display proper dignity if they wished to channel internal mana efficiently. He required authentic warfare. A voice suddenly shouted, "Hey, gray-haired dude." A youth positioned to his rear mentioned rumors of Frey's arcane proficiency. In a battered chamber, the youth identified himself as Alex Dreamid, an upperclassman obviously anticipating Frey's awe. Displaying zero hesitation, he boasted about effortlessly obliterating the scrawny freshman standing opposite him. Enraged, he interrogated Frey regarding the damage inflicted on David, referring to the crippled boy as a younger sibling. Frey appeared entirely unbothered. He questioned internally whether these fools targeted him intentionally. Demanding subservience, the older student elevated a palm. In Frey's perspective, they mirrored pampered toddlers. Dreamhead continuously demanded reasons for the altercation involving his associate. As he gloated regarding his 17th place finish during the previous Glade Heat Arcane competition, Frey let out a yawn. Ultimately, the upperclassman attempted intimidation, declaring this marked Frey's demise. To Frey, it represented nothing beyond a braggart menacing a junior to impress his peers. Those companions merely stood by as spectators. Grouping up against a perceived weakling proved unnecessary, particularly since Frey was simultaneously conjuring an arcane projectile. The spell impacted a trio of pupils simultaneously, launching Alex a massive distance backward. Frey's magnitude was sufficient to floor multiple targets via a single blast. This consequence merely amplified their rage. Alex remained motionless upon the ground. The survivors protested the ethics of striking mid-dialogue, yet Frey found tormenting privileged youths highly amusing. Their retaliation escalated significantly due to his dismissive demeanor. Golbor, the primary heir of the Gillard lineage, desired his destruction. Pri, the secondary heir of the Penelark clan, entered the fray additionally. Regardless, Frey lacked any apprehension. He elevated his palms, discharging an additional arcane projectile. While the pupils charged, he continuously pulled magical power, flattening them in rapid succession. A mere flick generated a devastating blast. Ultimately, he rested atop a mound of exhausted figures, viewing the entire ordeal as a squander of minutes. Emitting a scoff, he concluded they held zero true value. Overcast skies hovered above the campus. Frey had poured so much effort into refining his skills that fatigue forced him into slumber. Subsequently, a voice questioned his recent activities. He rotated to find Isabel. Peers had branded him the lethal projectile due to his habit of flooring opponents via that specific incantation. The moniker brought him severe humiliation, yet opportunity to deploy superior magic remained absent. Isabel felt shaken by the peculiar emotions he stirred within her. Observing him draped across the workstation, she found herself incapable of breaking eye contact. Without elevating his head from the surface, he requested her business. She mentioned implementing his guidance. She previously understood that pure blood enhanced arcane loops, yet blending it alongside mana essence at a 7:3 proportion proved a novel concept. Incorporating Troxel blood amplified the results further. Regardless, she expressed gratitude for the phenomenal revelation. Following a brief silence, she inquired regarding his upcoming lessons. Frey appeared so drained and apathetic that he merely locked eyes with her. She maintained a stare, visibly fascinated by his potential. He remained oblivious to his transition into Isabel's private instructor. Given her natural talent, he recognized adequate guidance might elevate her toward the 7th tier. He pondered the scenario momentarily. Next, he addressed her, offering to instruct her in Clash. She brightened immediately, stunned the moment had finally arrived. He informed her of his impending departure from the campus during recess for a training expedition, extending an invitation for her to observe. He cautioned the journey possessed severe hardships, potentially lethal ones, yet she agreed prior to his sentence concluding. Her desire to master Clash was absolute. Regardless of circumstances, she intended to accompany his expedition. Upon their scheduled departure, she arrived sporting a massive rucksack. Frey remained astounded by the sheer volume of impractical items she stored. Nevertheless, he assumed females toted various objects beyond his comprehension. Mildly anxious, she questioned their destination. Frey himself lacked absolute certainty. His thoughts drifted toward the Hispania Peaks. The region held a reputation as a beast haven, brimming with lethal hazards. Utilizing a chart, they plotted the swiftest path and calculated journey durations. A vessel would require roughly 12 hours, though the overland trail toward the peaks proved treacherous and beast-ridden. Regardless, Isabel prepped herself lacking any visible terror. She never anticipated a relaxing excursion. Frey scowled at her demeanor. During their stroll, they discussed warp crystals utilized for massive geographical skips. Such artifacts remained undiscovered 4 millennia prior. Arcane art stagnated, yet mechanical progress surged. Regardless, bypassing vast territories via a crystal appeared spectacular. The barrier remained the sheer cost. A jump linking Cal Symphony and Hispaniola spanned such distance that it demanded approximately 10 gold pieces. Frey inspected his satchels for currency, locating merely a single coin. Nevertheless, an alternative strategy existed. Isabel possessed aristocratic blood, similar to Frey Blake, prompting him to courteously inquire about her financial reserves. She carried absolutely zero. In her view, currency bred laziness, prompting her to abandon her funds for the sake of the expedition. She went as far as claiming that securing transport funds served as a training exercise. Frey felt paralyzed by her sheer audacity while she lugged an oversized rucksack. Isabel retorted that the concepts were entirely unrelated. Females simply required numerous items. They pressed onward, assuming a solution would appear upon hitting the harbor. Neither possessed prior employment experience. Approaching the piers, they discovered an area packed with mariners and laborers. They stared skyward in awe at the massive timber galleon. Boarding required zero payment for institution attendees, which justified the swarm of surrounding pupils. Additionally, the meals carried a stellar reputation. Frey was practically salivating at the prospect before discovering the vessel possessed zero vacancies, with a replacement delayed by 4 days. He slumped to the dirt, convinced their timeline was ruined. Their singular alternative remained the Cortez, a much older, plainer transport. Regardless, lodging complaints proved useless. Reality operated in such manners. Despite a layover in Judenbowl, it guaranteed arrival at Cow Symphony within 5 days, maintaining the complimentary fare for scholars. Below deck, the mariners conversed privately. A scarred individual confirmed preparations were finalized. The commander instructed a midnight departure to execute an immaculate assault. A separate individual, sporting a visual cover, chuckled. A comrade questioned his missing ocular organ, prompting the claim it served as a Buccaneers brand. Analyzing a chart, they plotted alongside ruthless Buccaneers. Gesturing toward an isolated zone, a crewmate declared their objective was the vessel docking at Judenbowl. An ambush would trigger post-passage of the Oscal archipelago. The sole remaining detail involved the vessel's title. It turned out to be the Cortez, loaded with wealthy youths. Frey and Isabel positioned themselves at the bow of the vessel. The commander provided an introduction and greeted the passengers. Isabel courteously initiated a dialogue. Lacking this specific transport, a 4-day delay awaited them, and while adequate, it carried a sparse crowd. The commander justified routing through the Oscal archipelago despite the frequent Buccaneer presence. Isabel grew anxious, yet he swiftly pacified her concerns. A mere pair of military galleons provided escort, yet both housed a 4th-tier sorcerer, specifically combat mages sourced from the Arcane Spire. Thus, should Buccaneers strike, they pose minimal danger. The dual spellcasters maintained defensive wards. This information allowed Isabel to unwind. Assuming the Buccaneers retained sanity, an assault was highly unlikely. Subsequently, Frey detected a disturbing anomaly. The sailors abruptly panicked upon spotting Buccaneers. A massive, heavily weaponized galleon sailed directly toward their position. Even Commander Mac remained paralyzed. Isabel gaped in terror at the unfolding chaos. While Frey retained his composure, the military escorts were already submerged. This solitary fact confirmed these were no standard Buccaneers. They possessed massive artillery and lethal determination. Moments prior, the raiders locked onto their mark, observing the Cortez's approach. The dual guard vessels caused concern, yet the raiders harbored a concealed asset, a unique participant for the assault.
Chanting in an alien tongue, he unleashed his capabilities. It proved to be Lord Dullard, an undead lich aiding their strike.
His sorcery struck fear even into the raiders. He radiated concentrated gloom and ruin, yet the commander placed faith in him. He represented a reanimated abomination, and holding a lich as an ally, the commander believed he would etch his name into Buccaneer lore. The reanimated entity initiated his incantation. Vile energy blended alongside umbral sorcery. His inaugural strike manifested as a frost javelin. He launched it toward the guard galleons, puncturing their exteriors to eliminate the presiding sorcerers. Observing the assault, the dual magic users attempted a defense. Time had expired. The javelins possessed overwhelming force. Despite utilizing every countermeasure, the frost continuously shredded the vessels, obliterating them entirely. The raider commander chuckled, currently fantasizing regarding the loot awaiting them. His sailors unsheathed their blades, preparing for warfare.